Hey everyone, welcome to Emma's Stories, where love finds a way through the chaos of life. Today we're diving into a tale called After a Wild Night, a virgin wakes up in a millionaire's room with no memory of her rescue. It's raw, it's real, and it's all about the heart. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this moves you, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's get right into it. Charlotte Evans wakes with a jolt, her breath catching in her throat as sunlight stabs through her eyelids. She's 22, a fresh Portland graduate. Her life's supposed to be a blank canvas of dreams. But this isn't her bed. The sheets are silk, cool against her skin, and the room smells faintly of lavender, not the cheap coffee of her tiny apartment. She's still in her lilac graduation dress, the one she wore last night to celebrate. But her mind is a black void. "Where am I?" she whispers, her voice trembling in the stillness. She sits up, heart pounding, and looks around. The room screams wealth. White curtains swaying like ghosts, a velvet chair in the corner, a painting of blues and golds staring back at her. Inside, she's screaming. I've always been the careful one, she thinks, the girl who plans every step, who doesn't take risks. So how did I end up here? Her fingers dig into the blanket, anchoring her as panic rises. Did I mess up? Did someone hurt me? She checks herself, relief flooding her when she realizes she's untouched. But the emptiness in her memory claws at her chest. Last night flashes in fragments. The Evergreen Hotel, laughter with Mia, punch that burned her throat. Then nothing. I was supposed to feel free, she thinks. Finally done with exams, ready to chase my dreams as an interior designer. Instead, I feel lost. She stands, legs shaky, and stumbles to the window. Outside, a lawn stretches endless, a fountain sparkles, and Portland's forests loom in the distance. Oh, it's beautiful, but it's not mine. This isn't my world. I don't belong here, she tells herself, her reflection staring back, wide-eyed and fragile. Her thoughts spiral. I've never been the girl who stands out, she admits silently. Growing up in Tacoma, I was just Charlie, the quiet one with the sketchbook, watching life happen to everyone else. I thought graduating would change that, make me bold, make me someone. But now I'm a stranger in a fairy tale I didn't write. Her breath fogs the glass as she presses a hand to it, steadying herself. What if this is my fault? What if I drank too much, said yes to the wrong person? The shame stings, even if she can't remember why. She turns, scanning the room again, her eyes landing on her shoes by the bed, her purse on a glass table. Everything's neat, too neat, like someone cared enough to keep her safe. Safe? The word feels foreign. I've never felt safe, not really, she thinks. Not since Dad left, not since Mom worked double shifts to keep us afloat. I built walls, kept people out, because I thought I wasn't worth loving. Her chest tightens, a tear threatening to spill, but she blinks it back. Pull it together, Charlie. You need answers. Footsteps echo outside the door, soft but deliberate, and her heart leaps into her throat. Someone's coming. She freezes, torn between hiding and facing this. What if they see me like this? Broken, scared, she wonders. What if they know I don't belong? The knob turns, and she holds her breath, her mind racing. I've always run from things I can't control, she thinks, but maybe this time I can't. Maybe this time I have to stand still. The door swings open, and a voice cuts through her chaos, warm, steady like a lifeline. "Morning, Charlotte." "Don't be scared." She turns, and there he is, a man she doesn't know, holding 2 mugs, his hazel eyes locking with hers. Time slows. I thought I wasn't worth loving, she thinks, her heart skipping, until he looked at me like I was his whole world, and in that instant everything changes. Charlotte Evans stands there, her breath shallow, the world tilting as the door swings open. She's braced herself for anything, a stranger's judgment, a threat, but what she hears melt her defenses. "Morning, Charlotte. Don't be scared." The voice is low, warm, wrapping around her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. She turns, and there he is, Daniel Brooks, though she doesn't know his name yet, stepping into the room with a quiet grace that steals her air. He's 34, older than her, with a presence that fills the space without trying. His white shirt is crisp, sleeves rolled up, showing arms that look strong enough to hold up the world. He's holding 2 mugs, steam curling up, and his hazel eyes meet hers, soft but steady. I've never been looked at like that, she thinks. Like I'm more than just a shadow passing through. Her heart stumbles, caught between fear and something she can't name. Who is he, she wonders? This man who walked into my mess and didn't flinch? Who are you? She whispers, her voice cracking, barely loud enough to reach him. She hugs herself, her lilac dress wrinkled and out of place in this perfect room. He stops, respecting the space between them, and says, I'm Daniel. Call me Dan. I brought you here last night. His words are simple, but they hit her hard. Brought me here? Her mind spins. I've always been invisible, she thinks. The girl no one notices. So why me? Why now? Dan sets 1 mug on the table, his movements careful, like he's afraid to scare her off. I saw you at the Evergreen Hotel, he says, his voice steady but laced with something deeper. Your graduation party. You were laughing. Then, you weren't. Some people, they gave you drinks, too many. You stumbled, nearly fell. I couldn't just watch. Charlie's chest tightens, flashes of last night flickering, the punch, the dizziness, voices blurring into noise. I thought I was celebrating, she thinks, finally free. Instead, I was falling apart. I don't drink, she says, her cheeks burning. Not usually. Last night was, I don't know, a mistake. Her voice trembles and she hates how small she sounds. I've always kept myself together, she thinks, because if I didn't, who would? Dan tilts his head, his gaze softening. It wasn't a mistake, he says. You were just living. But those guys, they saw you slipping. They were too close, talking about taking you somewhere. I told them you were with me, got you out. Her eyes widen, a cold shiver running through her. Taking me somewhere? The words echo, and she feels sick. I've always been afraid of being seen, she thinks, but not like that. Not as prey. You saved me, she says, barely audible, her hands twisting together. Dan nods, his jaw tightening for a split second. I couldn't let anything happen to you, he says, and there's a weight to his voice, like it's personal. I thought I wasn't worth saving, she thinks, until he said that, like it mattered. Why, she asks, louder now, needing to understand. Why me? You don't even know me. Dan looks at her, really looks, and the room shrinks to just them. Sometimes, he says, you see someone and you just know they're worth it. You don't need a reason. His words pierce her, cracking the walls she's built around her heart. I spent my life hiding, she thinks, convinced I'm not enough. But he saw me, really saw me, when I couldn't see myself. She stares at him, this man who's a stranger yet feels like a memory she hasn't lived. He's older, wiser, his eyes carrying stories she can't read. Thank you, she says, her voice soft but steady. I don't know how to repay that. Dan steps closer, just 1 step, and sets the 2nd mug down near her. You don't owe me anything, he says. Coffee? It'll help. His smile is small, gentle, and it lights something inside her she didn't know was dark. Charlie reaches for the mug, her fingers brushing it, warmth seeping into her skin. He's too good for me, she thinks, too kind, too everything. He's from a world of mansions and power, and I'm just Charlie, the girl who sketches dreams she's too scared to chase. But the way he looks at her, like she's not just a mistake from last night, makes her wonder. Dan gestures to the door. Breakfast, if you want. No rush. I'll take you home whenever you're ready. Okay, she says, a tiny smile breaking through. Breakfast sounds good. He turns, leading the way, and she follows, the mug warm in her hands. I've always run from what scares me, she thinks, but this time I'm walking toward it, toward him. He doesn't know it yet, but he's waking something in me I thought was lost. And as she steps into the hallway, her heart whispers, maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. Charlotte Evans follows Daniel Brooks out of the bedroom, her bare feet padding softly against the hardwood floor, the warm mug of coffee cradled in her hands like a shield. Her heart still racing, but it's not just fear now, it's something else, something alive and fluttering. He saved me, she thinks, this stranger who doesn't feel like a stranger anymore. I've always been the one who fades into the background, but he saw me when I couldn't see myself. She steps into a sunlit hallway, walls lined with framed art, and wonders how she ended up here, in his world. Dan leads her to a balcony, pushing open glass doors to reveal a view that steals her breath. Portland's forests stretch out below, green and endless, kissed by morning mist. A small table waits, set with plates of waffles drizzled with honey, a pitcher of chamomile tea steaming gently. "Sit," he says, pulling out a chair for her, his voice soft but sure. Charlie hesitates, then sinks into it, her lilac dress catching the light. "I don't belong here," she thinks, surrounded by all this beauty. "I'm just a girl from Tacoma with dreams too big for my hands." He sits across from her, pouring tea, and she watches him, this man who's all quiet strength and easy grace. "So," he says, breaking the silence, "tell me about last night. What were you celebrating?" His eyes meet hers, warm, curious, and she feels a pull she can't explain. "I graduated," she says, her voice small at first. "Interior design. It's been my dream since I was a kid, fixing up spaces, making them feel like home." She pauses, then adds, "Last night was supposed to be my moment, you know? My chance to feel like I mattered." Dan nods, listening like every word counts. "And then it went sideways," he says, not a question, just understanding. Charlie laughs, a shaky sound. "Yeah, I don't even drink, not really, but my friend Mia, she kept saying, 'Live a little, Charlie.' So I did. Too much, I guess." Her cheeks burn and she looks down at the waffles, poking them with her fork. "I thought I'd finally be brave," she thinks, "but I just ended up lost, again." He leans forward, just a little. "You weren't lost," he says. "You were just starting. There's no shame in that." His voice is steady, like he's handing her something solid to hold on to. She glances up, caught by the way he's looking at her, like she's not a mess, like she's worth something. "I've never had anyone say that to me," she thinks, not like they meant it. "What about you?" she asks, needing to shift the focus. "Who are you, Dan?" He smiles, a flicker of something bittersweet crossing his face. "I'm just a guy who got lucky," he says. "I grew up with nothing, no fancy degree, just a knack for fixing things. Started tinkering with software, built a company from scratch. Now I'm here." He gestures to the balcony, the mansion, but his eyes stay on her. Charlie's breath catches. He's so different, she thinks. All this success, this confidence, and still figuring out who I am, and he's already made it. "But you're alone," she says, surprising herself with the words. She blushes, stammering, "I mean, this place is huge. Don't you get lonely?" Dan's smile fades, and for a moment, he's quiet. "Sometimes," he admits, his voice softer now. "I spent so long building this life, I forgot to let anyone in. Until last night, when I saw you." Her heart skips. What does that mean, she thinks, her mind racing. He doesn't know me, but he's talking like he does. They eat in silence for a minute, the waffles sweet on her tongue, the tea warming her from the inside. She steals glances at him, his strong jaw, the way his hands move with purpose. He's everything I'm not, she thinks. Polished, powerful, sure of himself. I'm just a dreamer with a sketchbook and a borrowed dress. But the way he listens, the way he smiles when she talks about her designs, it chips away at her doubt. I've always felt small, she thinks, but sitting here with him, I feel seen. "Tell me more," he says, leaning back, his eyes locked on hers. "About your dreams. What kind of spaces do you want to create?" Charlie hesitates, then lets herself open up. "I want to make homes that feel safe," she says, her voice gaining strength. "Places where people can breathe, where they don't have to hide. Like my mom's house, but better. She used to work so hard for me, and I dream of giving her something beautiful one day." She stops, embarrassed, but Dan's smiling, a real smile that lights up his face. "That's beautiful," he says, "and I mean it. You've got a heart in those designs, Charlotte. Not everyone does." Her name on his lips feels like a gift, and she blushes again. No one's ever said that, she thinks, not like they believed it. "I thought I wasn't enough," until he looked at me like my dreams mattered. She takes a sip of tea, hiding her smile, but it's there, blooming inside her. Too soon, breakfast ends. Dan stands, clearing the plates. "I'll drive you home whenever you're ready," he says, but there's a hint of reluctance in his voice. Charlie nods, her stomach twisting. I should go, she thinks, back to my little life, away from this fairy tale. But I don't want to. He pulls a small silver bracelet from his pocket, simple and elegant, and holds it out. "A keepsake," he says, "for our first meeting. Call me if you ever need anything, okay?" She takes it, her fingers brushing his, a jolt running through her. "Thank you," she says, her voice thick with feeling, "for everything." He nods and she slips the bracelet on, its weight a quiet promise. I've always run from what I can't control, she thinks, watching him, but this time I want to stay. He's so far out of my reach, this man who built an empire, but when he looks at me, I feel like I could belong anywhere. They walk back inside, and she follows him, her heart whispering truths she's not ready to face. I thought I wasn't worth loving, she thinks, until he handed me this bracelet like it was nothing, and everything. She doesn't know it yet, but this morning, this man, is the start of something she never dared to dream. As they head toward the door, she clutches the bracelet, wondering if maybe, just maybe, she's not as alone as she's always believed. Charlotte Evans slips the silver bracelet onto her wrist as she leaves Daniel Brooks' mansion, the cool metal a quiet reminder of the man who pulled her from the edge of a night she can't recall. She climbs into his car, a sleek black thing that hums with power, and stares out the window as Portland's forests blur past. I should feel relieved, she thinks, going back to my life, my little apartment, my sketches, but all I feel is this ache, like I'm leaving something behind. Dan's quiet beside her, his hands steady on the wheel, and she wonders what he's thinking, this man who saw her at her weakest and didn't look away. A month passes, and Charlie tries to settle into her new routine. She lands a job at a small design studio, her first real step toward her dreams. The office is cozy, cluttered with fabric swatches and blueprints, and she throws herself into it, sketching late into the night. But the bracelet stays on her wrist, and every time it catches the light, she's back on that balcony, his voice in her ears. I thought I could forget him, she thinks, a stranger from a world I'll never touch. But he's there, in every quiet moment, like a song I can't stop hearing. Then one rainy Tuesday, everything shifts. She's in a meeting presenting her ideas for a hotel renovation when the door opens and there he is, Daniel Brooks, striding in with that same easy confidence. He's in a dark sweater now, no tie, but his presence fills the room. "Our new investor," her boss says, and Charlie's heart stops. Dan's eyes find hers, a flicker of surprise softening into something warmer. "Charlotte," he says, his voice low, familiar. "Good to see you again." She nods, her throat tight, thinking, I thought I wasn't worth remembering, until he said my name like it was his favorite word. They're thrown together, working on the Evergreen Hotel project, the very place where their story began. Days turn into late nights, blueprints spread across tables, coffee cups piling up. Dan's there, always, asking her questions, listening like her ideas matter. One evening, as rain taps the studio windows, he leans over her shoulder, pointing at a sketch. "This is brilliant," he says, his breath warm against her ear. "You've got a gift, Charlie." She freezes, her heart racing. No one's ever called me that, she thinks. Not like it's theirs to keep. I've always been invisible, but with him, I feel alive. The nights blur together, and soon it's not just work. They linger after meetings, sharing takeout under dim lights, talking about everything and nothing. She tells him about her mom, the woman who worked herself raw to give her a chance, and how she dreams of designing a home for her one day. He opens up too, his voice quiet as he admits, "I built all this, the company, the money, but it's empty sometimes. I've been running so long I forgot what it's like to stop." Charlie looks at him, his hazel eyes shadowed, and thinks, he's so strong, but he's lonely too. maybe we're not so different. One stormy night, the rain's relentless, pounding the streets as they leave the studio. Charlie forgot her jacket, and Dan grabs an umbrella, holding it over her as they dash to her bus stop. The wind catches it, flipping it inside out, and she stumbles, laughing, right into his arms. Time slows, the rain soaking them both, and she's pressed against him, his hand steady on her shoulders. I've never been this close to anyone, she thinks, her breath hitching. His shirt's damp, clinging to him, and she can feel his warmth through it, his heartbeat under her palm. They stand there, the world fading to just them, rain dripping from his hair onto her face. Dan looks down at her, his eyes dark with something she's afraid to name. I don't want to let you go, he says, his voice rough, raw. Charlie's heart pounds. I've always pushed people away, she thinks, because I thought they'd leave first, but he's here, holding me like I'm enough. She steps back, trembling, and says, We can't, Dan. You're everything, and I'm just starting. We're too different. He doesn't move, just watches her, rain streaking his face. Different doesn't mean wrong, he says. I've spent my life building walls, Charlie, but you make me want to tear them down. His words hit her like a wave, crashing through every doubt she's clung to. I thought I wasn't worth loving, she thinks, until he stood in the rain and said that like it was the truest thing he's ever known. She shakes her head, stepping further back. I need to think, she says, her voice breaking. I don't know how to do this. Dan nods, letting her go, but his eyes stay on her, steady and sure. Take all the time you need, he says. I'm not going anywhere. She turns, running to the bus, her shoes splashing through puddles, her mind a mess. I've never felt like this, she thinks, climbing aboard, watching him through the fogged window as he stands there, soaked and unwavering. He's too much, too big, too real. I'm just Charlie, the girl who dreams in pencil lines, not the one who gets the fairy tale. Back in her apartment, she collapses on her bed, the bracelet glinting under the lamp. She traces it with her finger, remembering his hands, his voice. He sees me, she thinks, really sees me, not the mess, not the fear, just me. I've always been afraid of falling, but with him it feels like flying. She curls up, the rain still tapping outside, and whispers to herself, What am I so scared of? He's not just a stranger anymore, he's in my bones now, and I don't know how to stop it. Days pass, and they keep working together, the air between them thick with unspoken things. One afternoon, he brings her coffee, just how she likes it, and sets it on her desk with a quiet smile. For you, he says, and walks away. She stares at it, her heart twisting. He remembers, she thinks, the little things, like they matter. I thought I'd always be alone until he made me feel like I was home. She sips it, warmth spreading through her, and knows she's in deeper than she ever meant to be. Their late nights stretch on, and every touch, every glance pulls her closer. One evening as they pack up, he brushes her hand, accidental but electric, and she doesn't pull away. I can't fight this, she thinks, looking up at him, his eyes searching hers. I don't want to. Dan pauses, his voice low. Charlie, he says, I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. Her breath catches, and she thinks, I've spent my life running from love, but with him I want to run toward it. She doesn't answer, not yet, but she smiles, small and real, and he smiles back. They leave together, stepping into the dusk, and she feels it, the shift, the moment she stops fighting. I thought I wasn't worth loving, she thinks, walking beside him, until he showed me I could be his whole world. And as they disappear into the Portland twilight, she knows this is only the beginning, a love she never saw coming, growing stronger with every heartbeat. Charlotte Evans sits at her desk in the design studio, her fingers tracing the silver bracelet Daniel Brooks gave her, her heart a tangled mess of hope and fear. It's been weeks since that rainy night, since his words cracked her open. I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. She's let him in, step by trembling step, their late nights weaving a thread she can't unravel. I thought I'd always be alone, she thinks, staring at a sketch of the Evergreen Hotel. But with him, I feel like I'm finally enough. She smiles, soft and secret, until the door swings open and everything shatters. Rachel, a sharp-edged co-worker with a knack for gossip, strides in, her eyes glinting with something dark. "Charlotte," she says, her voice dripping with venom, "you think you've got Dan wrapped around your finger, don't you?" Charlie freezes, her stomach dropping. "What are you talking about?" she asks, her voice small, unsteady. Rachel smirks, tossing a folder onto the desk. It lands with a thud, papers spilling out, photos, articles, a nightmare in black and white. Charlie's hands shake as she picks one up. A grainy image of a wrecked car, headlines screaming about a crash 10 years ago. Her breath catches, her world tilting. "I know this," she thinks, her mind racing back to a night she's buried deep. Her dad's voice, his laugh, then silence. Rachel leans in, her words a blade. "That crash killed your father, didn't it? And guess who's behind it? Daniel Brooks. His company made the software, some glitchy trash that sent that truck spinning. He's the reason your dad's gone." The room spins, and Charlie's knees buckle, her hand gripping the desk. "No," she whispers, her voice breaking. "It's not true. It can't be." But the papers stare back, cold and real, dates lining up with the worst day of her life. "I was 12, she thinks, sobbing into my mom's arms, asking why he didn't come home. And now Dan, the man who's held me together, he's the one who tore me apart?" Rachel laughs, bitter. "He didn't tell you, huh? Probably saved you that night to ease his guilt. You're just his redemption story." Charlie's heart cracks, a sob choking her. "I thought I wasn't worth loving," she thinks, until he looked at me like I was his whole world. Was it all a lie? She stumbles out of the studio, the rain outside mirroring the storm inside her. She needs air, needs answers, needs him. She finds Dan at his office, the sleek building towering over her like a judgment. He's at his desk, papers scattered, and looks up, smiling. "Charlotte, you're early," until he sees her face. Her tears, the folder clutched in her hands. "Is it true?" she says, her voice raw shaking. "Did you kill my dad?" Dan's smile vanishes, his face paling as he stands. "What are you?" he starts, but she slams the folder down, photos spilling across his desk. "The crash," she says, her voice rising. 10 years ago, your software, my father. He's gone because of you." Dan stares at the papers, his hands trembling, and for a moment he's silent, the weight of it crushing them both. "Charlie," he says finally, his voice breaking. "I didn't know it was him." She steps back, her chest heaving. "Didn't know?" she yells. "You built that company. You sold that junk. And then you found me, what, to fix your conscience? I trusted you, Dan. I let you in." Her tears fall hot and fast, and she thinks, "I've always been afraid of losing people, but I never thought I'd lose myself, too." Dan moves toward her, his eyes desperate. "Listen to me," he says. "Yes, my company made that software. There was a flaw, a mistake. It destroyed me when it happened, lawsuits, guilt, everything. But I didn't know your dad was one of them, not until now." Charlie shakes her head, rain dripping from her hair. "You should have told me," she says, her voice a whisper now. "You let me fall for you, and all this time, you were hiding this?" Dan reaches for her, but she pulls away. "I helped you that night because I saw you," he says, his voice thick with pain. "Not because of guilt, not because of the past, but because I couldn't walk away from you. And then I fell, Charlie, harder than I ever thought I could." Her heart twists, torn between the love she's felt and the betrayal cutting through her. "I thought you were my safe place," she thinks, "the one who'd never hurt me. But you did before I even knew you." She looks at him, his eyes pleading, and says, "How can I love you, Dan? How can I look at you and not see him, not hear my mom crying, not feel that hole in my life?" He flinches like she's struck him, and she thinks, "I've never hurt anyone before, but I'm breaking him now, and it's breaking me too." "I don't know how to fix this," he says, his voice cracking. "But I love you, Charlotte, not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. If you walk away, I'll understand, but I'll never stop loving you." She stares at him, rain streaking her face, her mind screaming. I thought I wasn't worth loving, she thinks, until he gave me everything, and now it's poison. I can't do this. I can't. She turns, running into the storm, her shoes splashing through puddles, her sobs lost in the wind. He calls after her, "Charlotte, please," but she doesn't stop. I've always run when it hurts, she thinks, collapsing against a wall, the rain soaking her through. He was my light, my chance, and now he's my darkness. How do I love him when he's tied to everything I've lost? She slides to the ground, clutching her knees, the bracelet glinting through the blur of tears. I let him in, she thinks, and now I'm falling apart, alone again, just like I always feared. Inside, Dan stands at his window, watching her disappear, his fists clenched. I thought I could protect her, he thinks, but I've ruined her instead. I love her, and it's not enough. The rain pounds on, a wall between them, and Charlie's left with a choice she never wanted: love or loss, him or her past, and no way to hold both without breaking. Charlotte Evans sits huddled against the wall, rain soaking her through, her lilac dress clinging to her skin like a second wound. The storm mirrors the chaos inside her, Daniel Brooks' words echoing in her ears. I love you, Charlotte, not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. She clutches the silver bracelet, her tears mixing with the downpour. I thought I wasn't worth loving, she thinks, until he showed me I could be everything, and now it's all broken. Her heart aches, torn between the man she's fallen for and the shadow of her father's death. Days pass in a blur, and Charlie hides in her apartment, the curtains drawn, her sketches untouched. She replays Rachel's words, Dan's confession, the crash that stole her dad. I've always carried that pain, she thinks, staring at a photo of him, his smile frozen in time. It's been me and Mom, holding each other up, and now Dan's part of it, a piece I can't erase. She twists the bracelet, torn. I want to hate him, she thinks, but every time I close my eyes, I see his face, hear his voice, feel his hands catching me in the rain. Then, one gray morning, there's a knock. She opens the door, and it's Dan, standing there, soaked from the drizzle, a folder in his hands. His hazel eyes are red-rimmed, like he hasn't slept, and her heart twists. Charlotte, he says, his voice soft, broken. I know I don't deserve this, but please just hear me out. She wants to slam the door, to run again, but something stops her. I've always pushed people away, she thinks, because it's easier than hurting. But he's here, and I can't look away. She steps aside, silent, and he walks in, setting the folder on her table. I've been digging, he says, opening it. Letters, records, everything from 10 years ago. I wrote to every family affected by that crash, offered help, money, anything I could. I didn't know your dad was one of them, Charlie, I swear, but I found this. He pulls out a faded page, his hand trembling. It's a letter, addressed to her mom, dated months after the accident. I've read it 100 times, he says. I didn't send it because I didn't think it was enough. Charlie takes it, her fingers shaking as she reads. Dear Mrs. Evans, I'm Daniel Brooks, and I'm so sorry for your loss. My company's failure took your husband, and I'll carry that forever. I've set up a fund for your daughter's education, anonymously, because it's the least I can do. She stops, her breath catching. The scholarship, she thinks, the one that got me through school, the one Mom said was a miracle. It was him. She looks up, tears brimming. You did this, she whispers. All those years? You were there? Dan nods, his voice thick. I didn't know it was you, not until now. I've lived with that guilt, Charlie, tried to make it right in any way I could, but meeting you, that wasn't about fixing anything. It was about you, just you. Her chest tightens, the weight of it crashing over her. I thought he was my enemy, she thinks, but he's been my shadow, holding me up when I didn't know I was falling. She sets the letter down, her hands trembling. Why didn't you tell me? She asks, her voice breaking. I didn't want you to see me like that, he says, stepping closer. A monster, a mistake. I wanted you to see me, the real me, the one who loves you more than I can stand. His eyes lock with hers, raw and pleading. Charlie's breath hitches. I've always run from the past, she thinks, because it hurts too much to face. But he's facing it for me. She wipes her tears, her voice steadying. I thought I couldn't love you, she says, that you'd taken everything from me. But you gave me something too, didn't you? Dan reaches for her hand, hesitant, and she lets him take it. I'd give you the world if I could, he says, his thumb brushing her skin. I love you, Charlotte, and I'll spend my life proving it, if you'll let me. She looks at their hands, the bracelet glinting between them, and feels the walls inside her crumble. I thought I wasn't worth loving, she thinks, until he stood here, broken too, and loved me anyway. She steps into him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed to his chest. I forgive you, she whispers, and I love you too. He holds her tight, his breath shuddering against her hair, and they stand there, the rain tapping softly outside, a quiet promise between them. I've always been afraid of falling apart, she thinks, but with him, I'm whole. Time skips forward, a year later, and they're in his mansion again, not as strangers but as something more. Charlie's in a white dress, simple and flowing, standing in the grand hall where it all began. The evergreen project's done, her designs lighting up the space, and Dan's beside her, his hand in hers, a ring on her finger. They step onto the balcony, the same one from that first morning, Portland's forests glowing in the sunset. He pulls her close, his voice low. I never thought I'd find you, he says, not in a million years. She smiles, resting her head on his shoulder. I was lost that night, she says, her voice soft, but you found me, Dan. You made me believe I could be someone's everything. He tilts her chin up, kissing her gently, and she thinks, I thought I'd always be alone until he looked at me like I was his whole world, and I finally believed it. The sun dips low, painting the sky in gold, and Charlie feels a peace she's never known. I've spent my life chasing dreams, she thinks, but this, him, us, it's more than I ever drew on paper. They turn back inside, laughter from friends and family echoing through the hall, her mom beaming, Mia cheering. Dan squeezes her hand, and she knows, whatever the past held, this is their future. A love built from broken pieces, stronger for it. I thought love would break me, she thinks, smiling at him, but it saved me instead. And there you have it, everyone, the end of Charlotte and Dan's story, or maybe just the beginning of something even more beautiful. I hope you felt every heartbeat, every tear, every moment they fought to find each other through the chaos. This is what Emma's Stories is all about. Love that doesn't give up. Love that sees you when you can't see yourself. If this tale touched you, if it made you feel a little less alone, then I've done my job. So let's talk about it, okay? Grab your phone, your laptop, whatever, and head down to the comments right now. Tell me, what did you think of Charlie's journey? She started that night lost, scared, thinking she wasn't worth loving, and then Dan came along, showing her she could be someone's whole world. Could you feel her pain when she found out about her dad, that moment when everything she'd built with him cracked? And what about that ending, standing together on that balcony, the past behind them, a future wide open? I got chills writing it, picturing her in that white dress, finally believing she's enough. What part hit you the hardest? I want to know. Here's a question for you to chew on. If you were Charlotte, standing in that rain, hearing Dan say he'd loved you all along, even through the mistakes, would you forgive him? Could you let go of the hurt, the past, to hold on to something real? Or would you walk away, keep those walls up because it's safer? I think about Charlie, how she'd always run from love, scared it'd break her, and then she chose to stay, to fight for it. What would you do? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one, and I can't wait to hear your heart on this. And hey, while you're down there, tell me where you're watching from. Are you curled up in New York with a coffee, maybe soaking up the sun in California? Or somewhere across the world, where the stars are out while I'm recording this? I love picturing you all part of this little family we're building here at MS Stories. Your voices, your stories, They matter to me, and they keep this channel alive. So, don't be shy. Say hi, let's connect. If this story wrapped around your soul like it did mine, please hit that like button. It's such a small thing, but it tells me you're with me, that these tales mean something to you too. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, click that little red button, and ring the bell. We've got more love stories coming, more hearts to mend, more moments to cry and smile over together. I don't want you to miss a single one. Imagine it. Next week, you're back here with me, diving into another romance, feeling all the feels. That's what we do here, right? Let's take one last look at Charlie and Dan. She woke up in that mansion, terrified, lost in a world she didn't know, and he was there, steady, sure, pulling her into a love she never expected. I think about her saying, "I thought I'd always be alone until he made me feel like home." And it gets me every time. That's what love can do. It finds you when you're not looking, holds you when you're falling. Maybe you've felt that too, or maybe you're still waiting. Either way, you're not alone here with us. So before I let you go, one more thing. Share this story with someone who needs it. A friend who's had a rough day, a sister who loves a good cry, anyone who could use a reminder that love's worth fighting for. Send them the link, tell them to join us. We're growing this little corner of the internet together, and every new voice makes it brighter. Thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling with me. You're why I do this. Every single one of you. I'll see you next time with another story to steal your heart. Until then, keep believing in love, keep chasing what matters, and know you're always welcome back at Emma's Stories. Take care, my friends, and let's talk soon in the comments. Bye for now.